Gopijana Balabha Girivanadari Gopijana Balabha Girivanadari Jasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Jasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Manachari Jamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopijana Balabha Girivanadari Jaya Jaya Gopijana Balabha Girivanadari Jaya Jasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Jasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Jasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Banachari Jamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parvajakacharya Asutara Satyasisi His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. Panchakopatarubhascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So this is my third Sunday in a row, and next week you'll all be blessed with Daiva Shakti Mataji again. So, but I've been fortunate to be able to be here with you all for this time. I was thinking, of course, talking about Prabhupada in India. Who knows what is the first temple Prabhupada established in India and installed deities? I know there's one person here that knows. Calcutta. Calcutta Temple, Albert Street Road, was the first temple that Prabhupada established in India. And of course, right here we have Narayani Mataji, who was the head pujari, which means pretty much she was the only pujari for many, many years. How many years? 7. Yes. And that's Radha Govinda Temple, yes. So and of course, most important place, Prabhupada's birthplace. And Prabhupada said it was the jewel. Calcutta was the jewel of the British Empire in India was Calcutta. In his childhood, he said everywhere there were nice lakes, ponds, parks, so many nice places. And he would, even when he went there in the 70s, he would go to these different places for his morning walk that were, you could see from the past, were very beautiful. Right in front of the temple, what do they call it? The lake? Pukar? What do they call it? Pukur. Yes. So it was right across the street from the temple. And I remember that temple, basically other than the temple room and a very nice veranda, outside had a very nice wide veranda when you would come up the stairs. I believe it was marble veranda. And that's where Prabhupada would take his massage. And of course, he had a little room just next to the temple. And he had the prime bathroom. There was no facility in that temple, what to speak of for the men that lived there, and especially for the women that lived there. It was even more difficult. Well, a very austere place. But it was worthwhile because whenever Prabhupada came there, anyone, when he was giving darshan, room was available to whoever would step in there and sit down. That pond across the street, it's where we would go and bathe in the morning, because the bathroom was I don't ever remember even going in that bathroom. It was not a nice place. And it had to be shared, right? It had to be shared by the men and the women, you can imagine. And I think even the women had to go through the bathroom to get to their quarters. So you can imagine.
While the men were using it. While the men were using it, we had to go.
Even while they were using it, everyone had to get to where they were doing. There was a nice little kitchen in the back. And the temple room was very nice. The deities had a nice facility. And Prabhupada would come out sometimes and he would watch Mangal Artik from the back of the temple room. And he knew everybody who was there in the temple. Prabhupada knew everyone. If he was in a place, he saw you once, he knew you. He would remember you. Even you saw you for 5 minutes. He could see you 10 years later and he would know who you were. He would know your name, your family. Wonderful, wonderful memory. And the memories there were also very nice. He stayed there for some days, sometimes several days. He even mentioned that he found Calcutta for him, he said, was a little difficult because he had so many acquaintances from when he was there as a youth, older, even through Grahastha life. And he felt like people took his presence for granted sometimes, that they could just come, I want to see Swamiji, I want to see Prabhupada. Because everybody considered they were old friends. Everyone was an old friend, family and friends. I was there when his son, Vrindavan, had come a few times. I don't ever know what their conversations were like, but I was there. And of course his sister would visit him almost daily. As much love as we can muster up, we say in English, we say muster up, as much love as we can acquire for Srila Prabhupada, she had more. She had more than all of us. She was so attached to her big brother. Prabhupada was her big brother. And she would come in the morning, sometimes around class time. She would have sometimes different bottles with her. She would have one bottle had Ganga Jal. And as soon as she would see us, she would sprinkle us. I'm not sure exactly what she was thinking, but of course it was purifying. So she was always purifying us with the Ganga Jal. The other bottle, that was like, who knows what the other bottle was?
Mustard oil.
Mustard oil. Because we didn't have mustard. I had mustard oil. I was the only devotee in the movement at that time, in the mid-70s, that had mustard oil. But it was for massage, not for cooking. Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he came into Prabhupada's room once. He was so disturbed because, of course, they all cooked in mustard oil. And mustard oil, not just you get mustard oil, there's many different varieties, purities, strengths, how it is. Like we see that with oil, cold pressed, first pressing, all these different things. So the mustard oil is like that as well. And she would bring the mustard oil for cooking because she was very fond of cooking for Srila Prabhupada, very fond of his association. She would come sit in the room during darshan. Prabhupada was speaking in English to his Western disciples, but she would just sit quietly in the corner. When you first saw her, I think most of us, when we would first see Pishima Babatarini, you would do a double take because she looked like Prabhupada. But she was even shorter and rounder. She was a bit rounder than Srila Prabhupada, but very similar face. And you always saw her with just that sari, like probably 6-7 meters. I guess that's a lot of swaddled around her, so much cloth swaddled around her body. And sometimes she would bring us Misti Dahi. You haven't had Misti Dahi unless you've been to Calcutta. You can get Misti Dahi. They sell it at the store right there in a container, but that's not Misti Dahi. You go there and you would get it in the clay pots. So everyone was always anxious to see her. And she enjoyed most of the devotees' company. She didn't care for Srutakirti very much because he would bar her from going to see her big brother. Prabhupada he tried to keep a little, when he wanted it was okay, but he also had his services that he did. So it wasn't, you just come in and out. So sometimes, especially of course if Prabhupada was resting, I would say, no, he's resting, and she'd get angry with me, So I was probably the only person she didn't care for a whole lot. And then cooking was another issue. Prabhupada, when it was 1975, so I had seen her, been around her a few times, but 75, 74 in Juhu, when Prabhupada was talking about when he was a child, and he said how his mother was first class cook. And she would make puffed rice. She would puff the rice herself, because puffed rice was one of Prabhupada's favorite meals, even as a child. Puffed rice with peanuts, muri, Prabhupada called muri, with peanuts. I remember we would make it with a little chance, ghee. Of course, we would put ghee, and make a little chans, and then put in peanuts and the puffed rice and just cook it up, saute it. And we put sliced cucumber on the side. Not sure how that worked in, but I was told that's what I did. I would put sliced cucumber in there. So Prabhupada said, my mother, she was first class cook. You know, he could talk about his childhood same way. You were there. He would bring you whenever Prabhupada talked, he could bring you right to that place. It was amazing. And you could see him in that place. He told me once he remembers being in his older sister's arms. He said, maybe I was 6 months old. Who can remember 6 months old? But he remembers being in the arms, he said, being held by his sister. And he said when they had festivals, just like we have Janmashtami, so many different, Ram Navami, he said everyone in the neighborhood would cook. They would all cook a preparation and they would get together and have a big feast, block party, feast. He said it was so strict. He said my mother had a very close friend across the street, another woman across the street. But for her to go across the street, they would send a carriage, a horse and buggy. She would get in the carriage and they would take her across the street. This was the culture Srila Prabhupada grew up in. And he said, my sister was a good cook. He said, very good cook. First class. He said, my mother taught her. Then he said, I'm also first class cook. He said, but I learned just by watching. He said that about different things, Prabhupada. He could watch something and he would know how to do it. He didn't need any other instruction. He said, just by watching. He said, so, and we all know, we've heard of Prabhupada's cooking, how first class cook Prabhupada was. So his sister would come and she'd bring sweets from K.C. Das. I imagine they're still there, probably bigger than ever. You can get, I've seen in the cans, you could even get rasgullas. You haven't had rasgullas unless you've had rasgullas in West Bengal, when you bite and they squeak. Nothing but paneer. No flour, no anything, just the paneer. And then cooked in the sugar water. So she would bring sweets from there, sandesh. Some of the sandesh, there were different flavors of sandesh. Even chocolate sandesh was there. And I would put the box by Prabhupada's room, because Prabhupada always, when a guest would come, everyone gets prasadam. No one leaves through the door. Did you give them prasadam? Have to get prasadam. So I say one day, and of course, like most everyone, and at the time I was just 22 years old, I like prasadam, and I especially like sweets, and I especially like Bengali sweets. So one day I'm in Prabhupada's room and I see the sweets by his asana, and there are ants in the sweets. So of course immediately I think, I have to tell Prabhupada, remove the sweets and I'll just blow off all the ants and eat them. So I went into Prabhupada's room and he's sitting behind the desk. One thing I couldn't understand was Prabhupada knew me, just to look at me, he could see everything. And then I was with him. So he knows you even more and more and more each day. Even as I knew a little bit about him, at least about how he did things, his regulation, what he ate, how much to put on his plate. First day I became his servant, he told me, don't put too much on my plate. He said, if you put too much, I'll lose my appetite. He says, you put a little each preparation. He said, if I want more, then I'll tell you. So that was one of the very first instructions about prasadam. The other one was it has to be on time. Just like here, you have prasad 3 o'clock, we know. You go there, your digestion's already begun. Just knowing you're going to eat, digestion starts. Sometimes when we see something, we can feel our tongue. The saliva starts on the tongue. There's digestive processes. So Prabhupada said, must be on time, otherwise you get indigestion. So he would say all these, he'd give little tidbits of information here and there, and then you would carry it out. So those sweets with the ants, I thought, I'm going to have a good time. So I offered obeisances. Prabhupada, I said, these sweets, ants all over them. He just looked at me. He said, they don't eat very much. And then he told me what to do. He said, go to the kitchen, get a thali and a katuri, bring it back. So then he said, turn the katuri upside down in the middle of the thali, and he poured some of his water from his clay jug, and then we put the box on top. That was after all the ants were off of it. He said, so no problem. So I didn't get those sweets. So we would cook for Prabhupada. I would cook and other devotees there. In India, I didn't cook a lot for Srila Prabhupada. In the West, it was very important because somehow or other, even back in those days, I guess, even Srila Prabhupada was training people in the beginning. The cooking was not up to the standard for giving to him. Whatever it was puris, chapatis, the dal, things were just not very good. So he traveled with a cook. That was one of my main services, was cooking. But when we went to India, so they were some of the very first disciples like Malati and Madri, Palika, so many, they all could cook. And cooking in India was a lot more difficult than it was cooking in the West, where you could just turn on a burner and you knew everything was set. It wasn't like that necessarily in India. Sometimes you're just cooking on wood, When I first went to Vrindavan, I remember Jamuna sitting on the floor with a bucket. That was the stove, was a bucket stove. And you had coals, and then, of course, cow dung, which is first class. Best way you can cook is to cook on cow dung. Best thing for the food. So in Calcutta, sometimes we had those kerosene. They were also very smelly, but you would get your flame. You had a pump to put pressure on the kerosene that was inside of it. So we'd cook on that. So we would cook for Prabhupada's disciples, and she would cook for Prabhupada. Pishima would cook. So she was cook. Obviously, she cooked Bengali style. And she could make Prabhupada so many different things. So this went on every day. I'd go in, I'd bring one plate in, put it on the table, the choki. Then I'd go back and get the Pishima plate and put it down. So same thing, I always tell you, threes. Things happen in threes. And it doesn't go beyond 3. 3 that's the clincher. It ends there. So one day I'm bringing in the plates, next day in the Prabhupada sitting room. And the third day, and I have the Pishima's plate, and I'm just bringing it into the door. And he said, don't bring that in here. He said, my sister's trying to kill me. This is what poison. This is Bengali, poison. They can use that word poison to mean so many things. Anything not good for you, it's poison. Anything you put in your body that's not good, that's poison for your body. So that's what he said. She's trying to kill me. And then he looked at me, he said, you eat it. I was already, my health was never very good in India. Never. So of course I objected. I said, Prabhupada, I can't eat that. He said, well then distribute it to the devotees. He said, but he didn't want me to even bring it in. Why? Because he liked it. Not that he didn't like it, he liked it. But the digestion wasn't happening. So then we tell his sister, Prabhupada can't digest it. What did she say? Prabhupada can digest nails if he wants. That was her vision of her transcendental big brother. He can digest nails. Tamal Krishna Maharaj came in the room once. Prabhupada, because Calcutta was difficult, and for us Westerners, eating like that was not an easy thing. He complained to Prabhupada. He said, Prabhupada, you say ghee is for the inside of the body, and oil is for the outside of the body. Prabhupada said, yes. He says, well, here in Bengal, he said, everything they cook in mustard oil. Prabhupada said, oh, it says very tasty. I say you could never win an argument with Srila Prabhupada. Whatever you would say, he could counter it. So then, that was his little sister. They grew up together. Once Prabhupada said to me, he said, my sister and I, he said, all we ever wanted to do was be devotees. He said, we didn't care about money, never thought of, he said, we just wanted to be devotees. He said, we didn't care, short life, long, whatever, just wanted to be devotees. Then he said, the others, meaning in his family, I guess sisters, and he said they all wanted lots of money and live a long life. He said, and they had no money and they died young. He said, me and my sister, he says, here, lived a long life. So that was his sister. So every day, when Prabhupada was in Calcutta, every day she wouldn't miss coming to see Prabhupada. He tells the story, your youth, when they would fly kites. Prabhupada would fly a kite when they were kids on the roof of their house. And they would run. Prabhupada said they would run back and forth. And of course he was the older brother. So he would have the kite and he would tell her, pray to Krishna. Pray to Krishna that the kite flies. Over the kid, everything. Pray to Krishna. We know he was devotee. I told you that also in Juhu, one evening, Prabhupada, for more than a half hour, he talked about his childhood. It was the most amazing. I'm just giving him massage, and the whole time he's talking, telling of different incidents that went on. So that was one of them when he said, in the evening, even when as his servant, sometimes in the evening, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, always hot milk. Always hot milk, a little sweetener, sugar, usually just sugar. But many of those nights he would call me in and tell me what to prepare. Sometimes paratha, puri, sabji. And he would tell you what sabji. He said, you can make me eggplant potato and puris. This was Prabhupada. 9 o'clock at night, he could eat 2, 3, 4 puris. You only brought in, just like chapatis, one at a time. Nice. Has to puff up. You never bring in chapati puri that wasn't like a ball. Had to be puffed up. So he said, one night when he was a boy, young boy, he told his mother, I want puris and sabji. And his mother said, too late, I'll make you muri. And Prabhupada said, I want puris. Prabhupada never, what he wanted, thankfully for us, whatever Prabhupada wanted, Prabhupada got. He wanted to spread Krishna consciousness all around the world. His desire was to do that, and he did it. In his 70s, coming to America, all around the world. I've been reading in Leelamrita, the struggle at every step in the 60s is amazing. So anyway, again, I said 3 times, I want puris. And his mother said, no, because she's thinking about his health, little boy, his digestion, whatever it might be. So again, she said, and he said, no. Then Prabhupada was insistent. He said, then my father said, if he wants puris, give him puris. So that was the dynamics in the family between mother and father. Father was not disciplinarian. Mother was disciplinarian. The schooling, because Prabhupada, he didn't care for school, he said. They had to hire someone to bring him to school at one point because he just wouldn't go. So his father said, if he wants puris, give him puris. So this is massaging him at night. And then Prabhupada looked, he said, perhaps my father knew. Imagine, he said that. You don't find that in his books. But he said, perhaps my father knew. And that's all he would say. He would put little things out there. He wouldn't elaborate. And of course, I didn't say anything, but I could understand what he was saying. Perhaps his father knew. He said that a few times to me. Perhaps my father knew. His father certainly set him up to be a wonderful devotee from the very beginning of his life. So Pishima was his younger sister. She was initiated. A god sister, initiated also by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So one day, I'm massaging Srila Prabhupada on the veranda outside his room. And I'm behind him, and I'm rubbing his back. And he starts talking to me. He said, do you know anyone who is fat without eating? Well, as soon as he said it, I could understand what he was thinking. And I laughed. I said, no, Prabhupada. I said, I don't think it was possible. He said, no, either do I. He said, but my sister, she's so fat. And she says she doesn't feel well. And I tell her, don't eat so much. Lose some weight. He said, and she tells me she's not eating. And I say, how can you be so fat if you're not eating? So he's telling me this as I'm giving him massage. He said, I don't think so. He said, but she doesn't feel good. And I tell her, well, then you should take care of your health. Don't eat so much. But she insists she's not eating, hardly eating anything. He said, but she's so fat. Then he stopped. So that was noontime. So of course he has his lunch, takes 15-20 minute nap. The afternoon time was Prabhupada's bhajan time. He would chant rounds. Sometimes he would play harmonium, sing different bhajans. He would read his books, just like he was telling us. He tells us to do all the time, to take that time for yourself to read. We know the story. He said, why am I reading my books? He said, because they're not my words, Krishna's words. Every word, he says, dictated by Krishna. So he would read his books. And he would pick up any one of his books. I saw the volume increase dramatically. I was first with him in 72. There were just 4 or 5 books on the shelf. By the time I left in 75, over 30, 40 books on his shelf. Wherever he went, there was a bookshelf. Prabhupada's books. They were the only books on his bookshelf. Nothing else. So the evening came. Now it's 6 p.m. and Prabhupada has darshan. I said in India, most everywhere in India at that time, the only gratification of any kind the devotees had was Prabhupada's association, his personal association. They stayed in India because he would come to India and they could go sit in his room. You couldn't do that anywhere else in the world. There you could do it. He knew, this is all I can give you. He would give himself, and everyone was happy to have Prabhupada. So that evening, we were sitting in the room, and maybe you were there, and of course Ekanath was there. I remember Madhavananda around that time, he was there. Kausalya, Gargamuni. And Prabhupada's talking to his disciples. A little small room. And Pishima walks in the door. She was this big. Sari wrapped around her. Black glasses like these she would have on her. And she'd come in and she'd offer obeisances to Prabhupada. And then she goes and sits in the far corner. And Prabhupada looks. Of course, he's speaking in English. And he says, just see my sister. He said, see how fat she is? And the devotees, they can't believe Prabhupada just said that. And they all start laughing. And he says, she's so fat. And he starts saying the same. And she says she doesn't eat. I tell her, how can you be fat without eating? And the devotees are practically crying. They're laughing so hard. And Prabhupada's laughing. He's enjoying. His sister's laughing. Because everyone's laughing. So she's also laughing along. She has no idea what's being said. But she's laughing. And I'm thinking, I've never seen Prabhupada. I've seen Prabhupada's sense of humor. He'd do so many things. But this was a whole other level of humor. But I could understand. Prabhupada, he had nothing else to give us. He had nothing else to give the devotees in these places. Like I said, they didn't even have a bathroom to use in Calcutta. There was, but not that anyone wanted to use it. Like I said, I would go outside, only for emergency situations. I would go outside and bathe in that tank across the street. In the dark, 4 o'clock in the morning. And that was scary, because we were told there was a ghost down in the bottom of the pond. And you had to be careful if you went in, that he could pull you down. So you'd go in and you'd dunk yourself a couple times, and then you'd run away, before you got pulled under by some spirit. But that was the favorite bathing place. I remember Achyutananda, he was amazing. He would just lie there on the water, hands behind his head, and float. He didn't have to move. His body would just stay on and he would just lie there and float in the water. Well, this was Calcutta temple. And Prabhupada, I said he would come out for Mangal Artik. Well, one morning he come out, so he knew. He knew. Narayani Mataji was there, he knew he knew everybody, just a dozen, maybe maximum a dozen people. So he would see, is everyone at Mangal Artik? And of course everyone was. You didn't not go to Mangal Artik in those days, there's no question. But then he went out another morning, and he saw one devotee. And this is from Prabhupada's at the back of the room. And he turned to him, he said, "Where were you yesterday?" He knew he wasn't at Mangalartik in the temple yesterday morning. Prabhupada said, "Where were you yesterday?" He said, "Oh, Prabhupada, I went to your home. And I attended Artik there." Prabhupada looked at him. He said, "This is your home. Not my address from when I was a child." He said, "This is your home." We know here in Vrindavan, we're most fortunate. Prabhupada announced this is literally his home. So special. We're the most fortunate people to be able to be what Prabhupada said is my home. We know Mayapur is place of worship. And you can see that, you feel that when you're there. And Juhu is business, where his office. Prabhupada said his office is there. That's so much what it's like there. And it's interesting when we go to places. I can go to different temples, but there's certain temples I feel very at home at. In Juhu, I can go to Juhu. I don't like to leave Vrindavan. Don't mind going to Juhu. Because I know Prabhupada works so hard. When I go there, I tell them, no other temple did Prabhupada put so much energy in to establish. Not even here in Vrindavan. Vrindavan, it went along. Prabhupada came. He was very active. But just to get the property in Juhu, what Prabhupada had to do, none of us could do. I remember everyone that would come to India from the West, whether from Europe or America, they would come to help. The one Grahasta, he came. He was big. He was GBC in Europe, European country. And he came because things weren't going well. Even after Mr. Nair had died, still so many struggles were there. And he came, and it was just like we say in the West, the knight in shining armor. He came, and he just came from Europe, and he had nice silk clothes on. Everything was bright, clean, and bright, and shiny. And he was clean and bright and shiny, and flew in, and he said, I was there in the room. He offered his dandavats, and he sat up and said, Prabhupada, don't worry. He said, oh, help. He said, meet with the lawyers. Everything will be okay. So each day in the afternoon, at the end of the day, he would come in and report to Prabhupada. And of course, he wasn't getting anywhere. But I saw him and his clothes get dull, more and more dull each day as India just beat him up. And everyone in India, every Indian beat him up. His clothes no longer white and shiny, no longer ironed. Hair was growing out. You know. And that first day, I remember when he said that, I just laughed, and he said, we'll see what happens. But everyone tried. They tried their best to help Srila Prabhupada in all situations. Already, it's 6:15, a little bit later. Actually, I was going to talk more about Vrindavan today, but we wound up in Calcutta because I read that. I didn't realize it was the first temple established, first deities Prabhupada installed in India there. And by Krishna's arrangement, we have that. We own that place now. At that time, they were just renting Calcutta temple. So now it's in our possession and a most wonderful place. Anyone have any questions?
I just had a story about Pinchima.
Yes.
She invited me for prasad at her house. You know, everything was soaked in mustard oil. I thought, I'm going to die because my liver was already finished. And so I was eating the sabji, and I got to the rice. I was so happy. And she took the bottle of mustard oil and
Poured it on the rice.
I said, oh, I give up.
Yeah.
But then I didn't get sick, and I felt like I was very blissful, and like I was in the spiritual world.
It's a science somehow. You know, Prabhupada Bhakti True Maharaj tells a story when they were in Rishikesh. So that was early in 77, April, May, just before Prabhupada finally came here. So Prabhupada showed him how to cook a few things, and one of the preparations had lots of chili, whole chilies in it. It also had a lot of ghee in it. So he showed Bhakti True Maharaj how to make it. And then the next day he said, so now you make it. And he didn't go into the kitchen. So Bhakti True Maharaj made it. And he brought it to Prabhupada and he said, this isn't what I showed you. And Maharaj said, well, Prabhupada, you use so many chilies. I thought they're really, wouldn't be good to have so much chilies. He says, well, that's why the chilies are there, because there's so much ghee in the preparations. So the chilies and the ghee would balance each other out. So this is how this preparation was made. He showed me one preparation, simple, potatoes and cabbage and potatoes. But he showed me just how he wanted it. And he shredded the cabbage just with the knife, cut it and then shred it. And potatoes were little cubes. So we would make the chaunts, again, always with ghee. He didn't use mustard oil. We always used ghee. So we made the chaunts, and then I put in the little cube potatoes and then put the cabbage in. But he had to keep it very high flame. So you always had a scrape. But that was part of the taste, was that literally scorched cabbage. The cabbage would become most blackened spots on it. But that was part of the preparation. So when he showed you something, he knew all the details, just how to do it, what to do. Said he showed me how to make, once nighttime, he said, do you know how to make paratha? I said, no. He said, well, I'll show you. Imagine. He said, you make a chapati dough and call me when it's ready. So then and he came in a little room. It was in New Dwarka, Los Angeles. So he said, you roll it out like chapati, but in ghee. So that's what I did, rolled it in ghee. He said, now you put ghee on the top and you fold it in half. So now you have a semicircle. Then you put ghee. All he kept saying was ghee. Then put more ghee across that. Then you fold it in half again. So now it's in quarters. And that's how you get your triangle shape. But you need ghee. Every time you do something, you have to add more ghee so nothing sticks together. And then we had the skillet with ghee. Put ghee on there. And it was medium-high flame. And then you put on your paratha. And as soon as you put it on, what do? Ghee on the top. Then you turn it over. When you turn it over, what do? Ghee. So this is how Prabhupada trained us up in Krishna consciousness. So then he had parathas and sabji and hot milk. Every night, hot milk. Like practically without fail, every night. Never had to ask for milk. Had to be there. And he wanted us also drinking our cup of milk each day. So when people came here, he wanted to see the guests. We all had cow's milk. And again, not just milk, cow's milk. So that was, but yeah. And then Pishima, Prabhupada came to Vrindavan. Maybe it was 74, 75. And he's like, how did she get here? He said, as though Prabhupada, the ladies, he just shook his head. All right. It was his sister. But of course, For the ladies, it was wonderful, because it was like they had somebody they could have close association with, which they couldn't get with Prabhupada so much. Huh? So, but she was available. She was pure devotee. And when she's in, she'd just go in the Prabhupada. I had no control. Most people I could. My god brothers, god sisters, wasn't so difficult. But her, she wouldn't listen. She acted like she just never understood anything I said. So one afternoon, the bell's ringing. And I go in and offer obeisance. Prabhupada said, sit down. He said, even she's my sister. I can't be alone with her. This was Prabhupada. He said, they'll talk. You know who they were? All the Goswamis and all their temples here. They were just looking to find some fault. He said, so you sit here. And she was here for days, and another day, after lunch, Prabhupada took his nap. And if you know Prabhupada's quarters here, you all know Prabhupada's quarters here, you have his sitting room, and as soon as you go in through the door towards his bedroom, that little room right there, that was the servants' quarters, 74, 75. So that's where, there's a straw mat there now. That's right where I would lie down, right there. So one day I go in, Prabhupada's resting, and I go in to take rest, take a little nap. And Pishima's lying on my bed. So I just left the room. I went out, sat at the front side, the entrance. So I couldn't wait. You know, I was like a son. I was Prabhupada's son. So as soon as Prabhupada was up, I went into his room. And Prabhupada looking, yes, he said, Prabhupada, I said, your sister's sleeping in my bed. Prabhupada said, she can't do that. He said, that's no good. He said, tell her she can't. And of course I said, Prabhupada, she won't listen to me. I can't tell her anything. He said, all right, you bring her in. He said, I'll talk to her. So then I went and said, Prabhupada wants to see you. So she'd be all happy, you know. He called for her. So he goes in, she goes in, we offer obeisances, and then Prabhupada starts lecturing her in Bengali, telling her, you know, you can't do this. I don't know what he said, but you can imagine what he said. We're Vrindavan, I'm a sannyasi, whatever you are, you can't be in sannyasi quarters sleeping. And then after a few minutes, and I'm sitting right there by her, looking at him, and he said, okay. He said, it won't happen again. I said, thank you, Prabhupada. So 24 hours later, I go into the room, she's sleeping in the bed. So she was like her brother. She just did whatever she wanted, she would do. Nobody was going to tell her anything else. So that was their relationship. So it was such a delight to see Prabhupada in that situation. His sons weren't coming. You know, they weren't coming to spend time with him. They were scheming sometimes, you know, for their future. But she, like Prabhupada said, they just wanted to be devotees. They had no other desire. So that was Pishima. Any more? We have time. One more question.
Particular about ahimsa meal, regular meal?
No, very much the opposite. In the U.S., back in those days, there was no organic anything, practically speaking. You know, getting anything organic was almost zero. So at the temple, they used everything commercial, dairy products, butter, milk. And the milk had vitamin D2 or vitamin D3, which was known as fish oil. So once the devotee, you know, came and told Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, it's Kali Yuga, everything contaminated. He said, you just offer. what we always say now, the best you can get, that's what you should offer. But Prabhupada he was, what's the word? There was no question of not drinking milk. Everyone had to have cow's milk. And some people say, well, it was different then. It wasn't very different then. They were killing the cows the same way then as they do now. It was going on then, maybe more, maybe similar. But and then the same thing happened with white sugar. You know how sugar gets white, right? At least then. Now you can get vegetarian sugar, ahimsa sugar, I guess. But then it was known, go through cow bone, ash. And same thing, Prabhupada said, Kali Yuga, why we offer everything to Krishna. Actually, there's no question of ahimsa with anything. If you're a farmer, all you do is kill so many things every day in your crops, picking your crops, and fertilizers, organic fertilizers can have all kinds of things that you wouldn't even want to know about. So this is the material world. It's Kali Yuga. And Prabhupada's thing was, we do the best we can for him. I would buy watermelons, back they had the big watermelons. I would cut it in half, and then I would only give Prabhupada the center portion, which is the sweetest part of the melon. Then the rest of the melon we would just distribute. So it was always wonderful watermelons. So, yes, that was milk. And New Vrindavan, practically, they gave him cream from the cows. It was like half and half. In the West they have a thing, it's half cream, half milk. Well, that's the kind of milk. And he never said, he just accepted it and he would take. Of course, all along he was telling us, develop farms, develop farms, develop farms. Now there's some going on, I think more than it ever has in the past. People are, some independently, some ISKCON, some not ISKCON, just people independently trying to be closer to nature as Prabhupada wanted. But, he said different things at different times. Once he said, everybody that's not out on Sankirtan should go live on the farm. So if you weren't out distributing books, he said, go to the farm, When I was with him for 16 months as a brahmachari, then I left him, got married. I was away for 8 months, and I was again with him for a year. But when I left him after the 16 months, the word traveled very fast, and Kirtanananda wrote him, have Srutakirti come back to New Vrindavan. Prabhupada he knew my nature so well, he called me in. He didn't say, go back to New Vrindavan. You came from New Vrindavan, you've been with me, now you go back to New Vrindavan with your wife, have a happy life. He didn't say like that. He said, Kirtanananda wants you to come to New Vrindavan. And I said, oh, Prabhupada, I already made arrangements. I'm going to Caracas, Venezuela. I said, what was his name? Chiksukananda. He said, they have no Brahmins there. I could go, give classes, do this, do that. I said, so Prabhupada said, he said, I asked him. He said, but he doesn't want to return to New Vrindavan. And then some months later, he got a letter from Mukunda Maharaj, Mukunda Das at Manor. So they had land. And he said, could you make a request that the different temples in the U.S. that they all send 2 devotees to live on the farm? And Prabhupada said that no one wants to go. He said, you have to get locally. He said, even Srutakirti, he said he wouldn't go back to New Vrindavan after he left. So Prabhupada everyone was from the city. To take a person from the city and say, go live on the farm. I always say, if you want devotee farmers, make farmers devotees. Then you'll have devotee farmers. But to take a city person their whole life and put them in this austere environment, not such an easy thing. Anyway, that's a little off the topic, and it's already late. So, again, thank you all. I see all familiar faces here each week, and appreciate your coming and inspiring me to share a little bit about Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Thank you.